So in my previous demo, I had this form that allowed me to iteratively build up a complex pending form data structure. So I could say Sarah Connor, Sarah at example.com, and we could add contacts. And each one of these buttons is submitting back to the server, and you can see this starting to build up a form field here. And we can add another contact, and this can be the mobile. And we'll just say X123. Mark as favorite, and you can see each one of these is adding or removing from this pending data structure. And the way that this works is that if we look at the form, what we'll see is that at the top of the form there's a hidden input that is submitting the entire state of the pending data structure back to the server on each form submission. We can see this in the network activity as well. When I go to add a contact and we look at what's going through here in the payload, what we can see is that serialized data structure is being passed back. Now, because of this, it actually allows us to take this form and break it up into multiple steps, where each step only has to deal with a subset of the inputs, because the entire state is always being passed back regardless of which fields are being rendered at the moment. So to demonstrate that, I have a follow-up demo here in which we're going to take that same basic data structure, the contact and the name and the email and the favorites, and we're going to break it up into a multi-step process. So you'll see that the first step here is just the name, and we can go Sarah Connor, and if we submit, we get a little error handling here. Please enter an email, Sarah Connor at example.com. We can mark this as favorite, and you'll see, of course, that the data is being updated here, favorite. At this point, we can go to step 2. Step 2 is just about building up the contact list. Let's go ahead and add a contact, 554. Let's add another one. Let's call it mobile and say it's 555X3093. And at this point, let's go next. And you'll see that we're at step 3 and we have completed. And if we look over here, we can see all of this data has been updated and applied to the pending form structure. Now we can go back to steps that we've already completed. Step 1. You see we have our name and our contact information here all previously populated. We can clear the favorite. It gets cleared from here. We can go back to step 2. We can remove this. You can see it's being removed from here. We can go to step 3, and again, we're done. And just as with the previous demo, if we look at the elements here and we look at the form, you'll see that we have our hidden form field being posting the entire state of the pending data structure on each form submission. So even though if we go to step 2, and step 2 is only revolving around this array of contacts, if we look at the hidden form field, it's still passing through the name and the email address and the is favorite flag. And in fact, if we look at the network activity, let's clear this, and we add a new contact, and we look at the post, even though our actions here are only revolving around contacts, again, we have the name and the email address and the is favorite flag. That's all being posted back with every single action. That's why this multi-step process allows us to act on a subset of this data structure while still maintaining the entire data structure across every form post. Now, because this data isn't being persisted to any kind of storage mechanism, we do have to treat every action and navigation as a post. So when we go to a previous step, this is not a URL-based navigation. And if we look at the steps, what we'll see is that the steps are actually just unstyled submit buttons with the action go to step 1, go to step 2. And that's because, again, we have to be submitting the entire state of the pending form data with each navigation. So we can't just say URL to step 1 or URL to step 2. We have to submit to step 1 and submit to step 2. So let's take a quick look at the ColdFusion code to see how this is working. Unlike in my previous demo, where I had all of the logic in my controller file, this top level ColdFusion CFML page, I have a little bit more logic this time. And because of that, I want to move some of that logic into this ColdFusion component, my multi-step form, which is going to extend the pending form data from the previous demo. The pending form data is using those .object paths that we discussed in the last post to access and set various values within the complex pending data structure. And just as a reminder, if we look at the data that's being submitted here in the network activity, you'll see that we have these dot delimited paths. So dot name, dot email. If we wanted to, let's remove this and we look at that post, we'll see we have dot contacts, dot one, dot type, dot contacts, dot one phone, action, delete contact two. And again, these dot delimited paths are pointing to parts of this complex data structure, and we're translating those dot delimited paths using this pending form data. So here we're talking about my multi-step form, and that's going to be this component which actually extends that pending form data. So essentially it's doing what the pending form data does, but is it going to expose some additional methods to make it easier to manipulate that data. So you'll see that in its constructor, it's calling the super constructor for the pending form data, and it's passing in the default data structure if this form field isn't populated. And then on top of the data that it's being stored, we have methods for adding a contact, deleting a contact, going to a particular step, going to the next step, and here we have some validation around what information has been provided in a particular step and whether or not we can proceed to the next step. This method can return an error message. So there's just some more complexity here. I didn't necessarily want it to be at the top level controller just to keep things cleaner. I don't feel super strongly. I could have had all of it here, and I don't think it would have made much of a difference. That said, now that we have our form proxy, and that's the thing that holds our data and applies the form fields to the data, we can look at how the controller works. We have our action variables that are split on the colon, right? If we look at our network activity here, we can see that the action to remove that contact was delete contact : underscore : 2. I'm using the underscore here just to say that I don't care about the object path in this case. I just care about the action type and the action index, right? We want to go to the contacts and remove the second one. Then we have to look at the particular action. Here's where the controller is essentially translating the form request into method calls on that form proxy on our my multi-step form instance. The next one, this returns an error message, which will just render to the page. And then ultimately, if we jump down here, our top level page defines the form. It defines the hidden post that includes the entire JSON representation of the pending form data. So the individual steps don't have to care about this. They just have to care about the form fields that are relevant to their particular step. And then the steps are nothing more than CF includes of individual files. And I'll just show you the first one as an example. And what we'll see here is that there is no hidden form field. That's all managed by the parent page. This step one only has to deal with the name, the email address, and the is favorite. And then it simply has a next button at the bottom with action next. And because, again, that entire pending structure is being submitted as a hidden form field, step one doesn't have to worry about the data involved in any of the other steps. It only has to worry about its own step data, and the rest of the data is persisted with each post as that hidden form field. So it's really, again, the fact that we're submitting this pending state as JSON, that's really what enables all of this to be done without a data persistence mechanism. The form itself and the form submission lifecycle is acting as that persistence mechanism across pages, which allows us, again, to split this whole workflow up into multiple steps where each step only cares about its own data. So anyway, this was just a fast follow from the previous version. It occurred to me that that JSON really unlocks some interesting potential behavior here. And yeah, I'm excited to start using this in some of my non-SPA or non-single page application type workflows.